January 7th, 1943, New York City. It's the middle of winter, and snow is falling quietly outside a tall hotel on 34th Street called the New Yorker. Inside, on the 33rd floor, a maid pushes her cleaning cart down a long hallway. She stops at room 3327. She knocks. No answer. She knocks again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. The maid has a key because she's not supposed to disturb this particular guest. He's lived in this room for almost 10 years, and he's given strict instructions never to be interrupted. But something feels wrong today, so she lets herself in. The room is dim, the curtains are drawn, and there, lying still in his bed, is an old man, 86 years old. He isn't breathing. He has been dead for some time. The maid looks around the small room, and what she sees is strange. There's no family photo on the nightstand, no telephone ringing with worried relatives, no grand furniture, no fine paintings, nothing that looks like it belongs to someone important. Just a simple bed, a writing desk covered in scribbled notes, and outside the window, pigeons. Dozens of them, cooing softly on the ledge, waiting for the breadcrumbs this old man fed them every single day. They were his only real company at the end. Here's the part that should stop you cold. This lonely old man, who died with almost no money to his name, in a rented room he could barely afford, is the reason the lights in your house turn on when you flip a switch. He's the reason your phone charger works. He's the reason factories hum, hospitals run, and entire cities glow at night. Nearly every plug, every motor, every wire carrying electricity into your home today exists because of an idea this one man had inside his own mind, decades before anyone else could even imagine it. His name was Nikola Tesla, and the saddest part of his story isn't that he died, it's that almost nobody noticed. How does a man who powers the modern world end up forgotten, broke, and alone with only pigeons for friends? That's exactly what we're about to find out, and it starts, fittingly, with a thunderstorm. Quick question for you. When you hear the word electricity, whose name pops into your head? Probably Thomas Edison. Right, the man with the light bulb. Maybe you've never heard the name Nikola Tesla at all. And that's strange, because if you ask scientists and engineers who actually understand how electricity works, many of them will tell you Tesla deserves just as much credit as Edison. Maybe more. Here's why that matters. Every single time electricity travels through wires to reach your house, from the power plant, across the countryside, into your neighborhood, and finally into the wall socket behind your couch, it's traveling using a system Tesla invented called alternating current. We'll explain exactly what that means in a minute, don't worry. But the short version is this. Without Tesla's idea, the electrical grid that powers your entire city simply wouldn't work the way it does. Edison gets the credit. Tesla did the work. So who was this man? At the height of his fame, in the 1890s, Nikola Tesla was one of the most famous, most talked about men on Earth. He dined with millionaires. He was friends with one of the most beloved writers in American history. Newspapers described him like he was part scientist, part magician. He held packed lectures where he let 1,000,000 volts of electricity shoot through his own body just to prove a point, and walked away smiling. And then somehow the world forgot him. This is the story of that man, from a thunderstorm in a tiny village to a lonely hotel room in New York City. It's a story about a boy who could build inventions entirely inside his own head before ever touching a tool. It's a story about a furious rivalry with the most famous inventor in America. It's a story about a tower built to give the entire world electricity for free, and about a man who cared so much about that dream that he gave up almost everything else to chase it. This is the true story of the man who tried to give electricity to the whole world for free, and nearly succeeded. Let's rewind the clock all the way back to the night he was born, because even that night, lightning was already involved. Picture a small wooden farmhouse in the middle of the night, somewhere in the mountains of what is today Croatia. The sky outside is exploding with lightning, thunder rattling the windows in their frames, the kind of storm that makes grown adults nervous. And inside that farmhouse, at the stroke of midnight between July 9th and July 10th, 1856, a baby boy is born. The midwife helping deliver him is so unsettled by the storm that she mutters that the baby will be cursed, a child of the storm. His mother, exhausted but quick-witted, looks at her, and replies that he'll be a child of light instead. She had no idea how right she would turn out to be. The baby's name was Nikola Tesla, and he was born into a family of Serbian heritage in the small village of Smiljan, then part of the Austrian Empire. His father, Milutin Tesla, was an Orthodox priest, a serious, deeply learned man who filled his house with books on religion, science, mathematics, and literature in several languages. Milutin had one clear plan for his youngest son. Nikola would grow up, study at the seminary, and become a priest just like him. Nikola had very different plans, even if he didn't know it yet. Tesla's mother, Duka Mandic, might be the most underrated person in this entire story. She came from a long line of inventors, and even though she never had the chance to go to school herself, she had one of the sharpest minds anyone in her village had ever seen. She could recite entire epic poems from memory, hundreds of lines long. She designed and built her own farm tools and looms. When the ones she had weren't good enough, Tesla himself later said that his mother was an inventor of the first order, and he meant it. Whatever spark of genius Tesla had, he always insisted it came from her. Tesla claimed he had something called an eidetic memory, almost a photographic memory, and he credited the memory training his mother gave him as a small child for that incredible ability. He grew up to speak 8 languages fluently. As a small boy, Tesla had a black cat named Machak, and one ordinary evening, while petting him, something happened that would change the course of human history without either of them realizing it. Tesla stroked the cat's back, and a stream of static electric sparks crackled up Machak's fur, lighting the dark room with a strange blue glow. Tesla's father, trying to explain the mystery, told him it was simply electricity, the same force that powers the lightning in a storm. Young Nikola stood there, staring at his glowing cat, and asked himself a question that would define the rest of his life. Is nature a giant cat? And if we stroke its back, can we make sparks fly from the universe itself? It's a strange question for a child to ask, but Tesla was not an ordinary child, and what happened next in his life would make him even stranger and far sadder. Have you ever made a small mistake, maybe broken something, or said something you didn't mean, and felt like everyone was angry with you for way longer than it seemed fair? Now imagine carrying a weight like that for your entire life over something that was never even your fault. That's what happened to young Nikola Tesla. Tesla had an older brother named Dane, who by every account was brilliant, maybe even more naturally gifted than Nikola himself. Their father adored Dane and had high hopes for him, but when Nikola was just a small boy, Dane was killed in a horrific accident involving the family's prized horse. Nikola witnessed it happen. The image never left him. For the rest of his life, Tesla would describe being haunted by visions of his brother, flashes of memory that returned to him uninvited, especially during moments of stress. His father, Milutin, was crushed by grief, and in his sorrow he withdrew from his surviving children, especially from Nikola. Some historians believe Milutin even, without meaning to, treated Nikola as though he could never measure up to the brilliant son he had lost. Nikola, only a young boy himself, absorbed that message in the worst possible way. He decided he would have to be perfect, flawless, extraordinary. If he could just be impressive enough, maybe his father would love him the way he once loved Dane. That pressure didn't just disappear as Tesla grew older, it reshaped him. Tesla developed a long list of unusual habits and fears that stayed with him his entire life. He became deeply afraid of germs, refusing to shake hands with people. He developed a strange aversion to human hair and an intense dislike of pearls and earrings. He once said the sight of a woman's earrings could make him feel physically ill. He started counting his steps as he walked. He calculated the volume of his food before eating it and felt genuinely uncomfortable unless that number could be divided evenly by 3. It's tempting to look at habits like these and laugh or call them weird. But think about it differently for a second. These weren't jokes to Tesla. They were the only tools a grieving, anxious child had to make an unpredictable, painful world feel a little more controllable. Lots of people, even today, develop routines and rituals to cope with anxiety and grief. Tesla's mind simply worked on a much bigger, much stranger scale than most. Tesla once said that as a boy, the line between his imagination and reality nearly blurred completely. He sometimes couldn't tell whether something he pictured in his mind had actually happened or not. For most children, that would be terrifying. For Tesla, it turned out to be the doorway into the most powerful skill of his entire life. Because that overactive imagination, the one that frightened him as a boy, was about to become the exact thing that let him see inventions no one else on Earth could even picture. Have you ever had an idea so clear in your head that it felt almost real, like you could reach out and touch it? That's how Nikola Tesla invented almost everything he ever created. As Tesla grew older, the flashes of light and vivid mental images that had once frightened him as a young boy slowly transformed into something incredible, a kind of inner workshop. Tesla discovered that he could picture an invention in complete detail inside his mind, every gear, every wire, every moving part, and then run it, mentally. He could watch the machine operate in his imagination as clearly as if it were sitting right in front of him on a table. Years later, as an adult, Tesla described this process in an interview, and his words are worth hearing almost exactly as he said them. "I do not rush into actual work. When I get an idea, I start at once building it up in my imagination. I change the construction, make improvements, and operate the device in my mind." He said it didn't matter to him whether he tested a machine in his thoughts or in his workshop, because by the time he built the real thing, he had already run it, fixed it, and perfected it 100 times over inside his head. Think about how wild that is. Most inventors build something, test it, watch it fail, and then go back and try again, over and over. Tesla skipped almost all of that. He did the failing and fixing entirely inside his own mind, completely silently, and only built the final working version once he was sure it was right. Tesla claimed that for over 20 years, every single device he built using this method worked exactly the way he had imagined it would, without a single exception. This unusual gift showed up early. As a boy, Tesla once examined a fire hose at the scene of a real fire and instantly spotted a small kink in the hose that was choking off the water supply, something the experienced firefighters around him hadn't noticed. He fixed it in seconds and was treated like a hero. He sketched designs for flying machines that worked on principles real helicopters would later use. Decades before anyone built one, he took apart clocks just to understand the invisible logic ticking inside them. But Tesla's path toward becoming the inventor, history remembers, almost didn't happen at all because it nearly ended with his death. At 17 years old, Nikola Tesla was preparing for the one future his father had always wanted for him, life in a seminary, training to become a priest. And then suddenly, Tesla became deathly ill with cholera, a brutal disease that was, in the 1800s, often a death sentence. For 9 agonizing months, Tesla was bedridden. He drifted in and out of consciousness. More than once, doctors believed he wouldn't survive the night. His father sat beside him, watching helplessly, terrified of losing a second son. During one especially dark moment, when everyone in the room thought the end had come, Tesla found the strength to speak to his father. He said that if his father would only let him study engineering instead of becoming a priest, he believed he might recover. It's impossible to know for certain whether Tesla truly believed that promise would heal him, or whether some deep, desperate part of his mind simply refused to die with his dream unfulfilled. Either way, his father, desperate, grieving, and unwilling to bury another son, made him a solemn promise. If Nikola lived, he would be sent to the very best technical school in the world. Almost immediately afterward, Tesla began to recover. He later compared the experience to the biblical story of Lazarus, rising back to life when everyone around him had already given up hope. Tesla's father kept his promise. Years later, he secured Nikola a scholarship to study at the Polytechnic School in Graz, Austria, sending his son off with an embroidered bag made by his mother, a small piece of home he carried with him for the rest of his life. Tesla had won his future, but in Graz, he was about to discover the idea that would define the rest of his career and lose almost everything else trying to chase it. Have you ever had a teacher tell you, in front of the entire class, that your idea was impossible? Now imagine that idea turning out to be one of the most important inventions in human history. At the Polytechnic School in Graz, Tesla became completely consumed by the subject of electricity. His professors had never seen a student work like this before. He reportedly studied from 3 in the morning until 11 at night, missing meals, missing sleep, pushing himself so hard that one professor actually wrote a worried letter to Tesla's father, warning that his son might be working himself to death. It was here, in a classroom, that Tesla first encountered the technology that would become his life's obsession. At the time, almost all electric motors ran on something called direct current, or DC for short. Imagine water flowing through a garden hose in only one direction, constantly, the same way every time. That's basically what direct current does with electricity. It works, but it has serious limitations, especially over long distances. Tesla had a different idea. What if, instead of flowing in just one direction, the electric current could switch directions back and forth rapidly, dozens of times every second? That's called alternating current, or AC. Imagine that same garden hose, except now water is pulsing forward and backward in a steady rhythm. It sounds strange, but that rhythm turns out to be incredibly useful. It lets electricity travel much farther, much more efficiently, without losing power along the way. Tesla proposed this idea to one of his professors during a demonstration of an early electric motor. The professor's response wasn't curiosity, it was ridicule. He told Tesla, in front of the entire classroom, that what he was describing was essentially a perpetual motion machine, a fantasy device that breaks the basic laws of physics. He said Tesla would never accomplish it. Imagine standing in that classroom, your cheeks burning, while a man you respect tells your whole class that your idea is nonsense. For most people, that kind of humiliation would be the end of it. But somewhere inside Tesla, a stubborn certainty took root instead. He knew, with total confidence, that he was right, and that one day he would prove it. Unfortunately, Tesla's college years didn't end as a triumphant success story. At least, not yet. During his second year, he developed a serious gambling addiction, losing his entire tuition allowance at the card tables. Combined with the stress of his studies and his personal struggles, Tesla's grades collapsed. By December of 1878, he had dropped out of the Polytechnic without ever earning his degree, a fact he was so ashamed of that he hid it from his own family and friends for years. For a while, Tesla seemed to be drifting, broke, embarrassed, unsure what his future even held. But 4 years later, walking through a city park with a close friend, everything would suddenly, brilliantly click into place. Budapest, February 1882, late afternoon. Imagine you are walking through a city park in Budapest. It is winter's edge tilting towards spring, not warm yet, but not biting either. The light at this hour in this part of the world is extraordinary, golden and low and long, stretching the shadows of the bare trees across the path like dark fingers. You are walking with your friend and colleague, a man named Anital Sigeti. You are both bundled against the cold. You have been unwell. Your body has been giving you trouble for months. Oversensitivity to everything. Sounds too loud, lights too bright. The ticking of a clock 3 rooms away, drilling into your skull. You have been treating yourself with long walks, trying to let the city's open spaces quiet the roar inside your head. You begin to recite poetry, the way you sometimes do when you want your mind to settle. You choose Goethe, Faust, the great German poem about a man who makes a bargain with the devil in pursuit of knowledge. You reach these lines. The glow retreats, done is the day of toil, it yonder hastes, new fields of life exploring. Ah, that no wing can lift me from the soil upon its track to follow soaring. And then all at once it happens. Not gradually, not as the result of careful thinking. All at once, like a door blown open by wind. You stop walking. You see it. The rotating magnetic field. The system by which alternating current could be used to create a continuously spinning magnetic force. A force that could turn a motor without a commutator, without sparks, without the inefficiency that had always plagued direct current machines. You see the entire mechanism, complete, turning in your mind like something you have simply remembered rather than invented. You drop to your knees. You pick up a stick. You draw the design in the dirt. Your friend Sigeti stares at you. You look up at him. Your eyes, he would later say, were strange, lit with something. "Watch me," you tell him. "Watch me reverse it." Nikola Tesla knelt in a Budapest park in February 1882 and drew in the dirt the design for the AC induction motor, the invention that would, within a decade, power the entire world. Think about what this moment means. Tesla had been carrying this problem for years, since the day his professor humiliated him, since the morning he watched sparks leap from a DC motor and thought, "There is a better way." The idea had been building in his mental workshop, half seen, almost there, just out of reach. And then a line from a poem about a man who wanted to fly, and it was all there. The concept Tesla discovered in that park, the rotating magnetic field, is still the fundamental principle behind almost every electric motor on Earth today. Every washing machine, every electric car, every factory floor, every elevator you have ever ridden. All of them turn on the idea that Nikola Tesla drew in the dirt with a stick while his friend watched. Tesla spent the rest of that walk explaining the system to Szigeti. By the time they got home, he had not just the concept, but the full design mapped in his imagination. He could build it, and test it, and run it entirely in his head. He knew it would work. The question was, who would let him build it? The answer to that question was on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and to get there, Tesla was going to have to make a very long voyage with almost nothing in his pockets. By 1882, Tesla had moved to Paris to work for the Continental Edison Company, Thomas Edison's European operation, which was busy installing electrical systems across France and Germany. Tesla's job was to work on direct current generators and motors, the backbone of Edison's business. He did it brilliantly, and his reputation grew so quickly that the company started sending him around Europe to troubleshoot problems at other Edison installations. He was good at it. He was very, very good at it. But he was also deeply frustrated, because the thing he actually wanted to build, the AC motor, the rotating magnetic field, the design he'd drawn in the dirt in Budapest, was not what Edison's company was interested in. They were a DC company. Alternating current was the competition. In Strasbourg, France, Tesla quietly and secretly built the first prototype of his AC induction motor, funding it himself, working on it in his private time. It ran. It worked, exactly as he had known it would. He tried to find investors in Europe who might help him develop it further. Nobody was interested. One person might be, Tesla thought. One person in the world had both the technical understanding to grasp what Tesla had invented and the power and resources to actually build it. Thomas Edison. Tesla had one of Edison's close associates, a man named Charles Batchelor, write him a letter of introduction. The letter reportedly said, "I know two great men, and you are one of them. The other is this young man." Tesla packed what little he had. During the voyage, according to the stories he later told, and Tesla was not above a dramatic retelling, he encountered shipboard chaos that may have involved a near mutiny. He arrived in New York Harbor on June 6, 1884. He was 28 years old. In his pocket 4 cents. 4 cents, a letter of introduction, and a mind full of inventions that the world wasn't ready for yet. When Tesla arrived at the immigration desk in New York, the officer misheard him say Smiljan, the name of his home village, and registered him as being from Sweden. Nikola Tesla, the future inventor who would become more American than almost anyone, entered the United States officially listed as Swedish. New York in 1884 was already electrified, or at least parts of it were. Edison had built his first DC power station on Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan in 1882, and wealthy neighborhoods were beginning to see electric lights replacing gas lamps. The city was alive with the excitement and the danger of a technology everyone could feel, but no one fully understood. Horses bolted when underground cables shocked them through their shoes. Fires broke out. The whole enterprise felt both miraculous and terrifying. And somewhere in this buzzing, crackling, astonishing city, Thomas Alva Edison, the most famous inventor in the world, had his offices. Tesla found them. He handed over the letter. Edison read it. And the two greatest electrical minds of the century were in the same room for the first time. "I was thrilled to the marrow," Tesla later wrote. "This great man had revolutionized the world with his incandescent lamp, and I was burning to show him my motor that ran on alternating currents." Edison hired him, and very shortly afterward, One of the most famous betrayals in the history of science took place. Edison put Tesla to work improving his DC generators, his direct current machines, not the AC motor, not the rotating magnetic field. The old system, the Edison system, the one Tesla privately believed was already obsolete. But Tesla was a professional, and he was grateful for the chance, and he did the work. He threw himself into it with everything he had. His regular hours at the Edison Machine Works were from 10:30 in the morning until 5 o'clock the next morning. Read that again. 5 in the morning. 18.5 hours a day, 6 days a week. He redesigned generator after generator, finding efficiencies, solving problems that had stumped Edison's other engineers. Edison, according to Tesla, offered him $50,000 if he could successfully redesign all 24 of Edison's DC generators. $50,000. In today's money, that is over $1.5 million. Tesla accepted the challenge. He succeeded. He went to Edison and asked for his $50,000. Edison looked at him, and then Edison said, and these words have echoed for over 100 years, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor. It was a joke. The offer had been a joke. There was no $50,000. There had never been any $50,000. It was," Edison explained, with the comfortable amusement of a man who had all the power in the room, "just a figure of speech, a way of expressing enthusiasm for a project." Surely Tesla understood that. Tesla did not understand that. Tesla stood up. Tesla put on his hat. Tesla walked out. He resigned after 6 months, with nothing to show for half a year of 20-hour workdays except the satisfaction of having done the work brilliantly and the burning humiliation of being played for a fool. What followed was the lowest point of Tesla's adult life. He had no money. He had no connections yet in this country. He had no job. And he had the great, grinding, humbling experience that many immigrants to new countries know, being told that his talents and his education and his resume didn't matter as much as the ground beneath his feet. Tesla dug ditches. Not metaphorically. Literally. Physical labor, in the street, with a shovel, laying cable for Edison's underground DC network. $2 a day. He, the man who had designed the AC induction motor in a city park in Budapest, the man who had been called a star of first rank by his university dean, laid cable in the New York mud at $2 a day. "I lived through a year of bitter tears," he wrote later. But he never stopped thinking. He never stopped believing. And slowly, painfully, a path began to open. Because in New York, there were other people. People who were watching Edison and wondering if perhaps there was a better way. And some of them had money, and some of them were beginning to wonder if this strange Serbian immigrant, with the haunted eyes and the brilliant reputation, might have something worth investing in. By 1886, Tesla had found new backers, Alfred S. Brown, a Western Union superintendent, and a lawyer named Charles Peck. Together, they helped him establish the Tesla Electric Company in Manhattan. Tesla built himself a laboratory. He went back to his mental workshop. He took the AC induction motor that had been running in his imagination since Budapest and built it, physically, in the real world, in iron and copper and wire. It worked, exactly as he had known it would. In May of 1888, Tesla stood before the American Institute of Electrical Engineers and delivered a paper called A New System of Alternating Current Motors and Transformers. The engineering world leaned forward. Within days, the most important industrialist in the American electricity business came to Tesla's laboratory. His name was George Westinghouse. Westinghouse was not Edison. He was not an inventor himself. He was something equally important, a man who understood what good inventions were worth and had the resources and the will to build them at scale. He had made his first fortune inventing the railway air brake. He ran the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company, which was Edison's main competitor in the electricity business. And he needed exactly what Tesla had. Westinghouse looked at the AC motor. He understood, immediately and completely, what he was looking at. He offered to buy all of Tesla's patents related to alternating current, generators, motors, transformers, transmission systems, all of them. The purchase price has been reported at around $1 million in total, plus a royalty of $2.50 for every horsepower generated by any machine built using Tesla's designs. Tesla accepted. The 40 patents that Westinghouse purchased from Tesla in 1888 have been called the most valuable patents since the invention of the telephone. Together, they form the complete blueprint for the electrical system that powers the entire modern world. Tesla was suddenly wealthy. He was celebrated. He was on his way to everything he had ever dreamed of. But Thomas Edison was watching. And Thomas Edison was not going to go quietly. When George Westinghouse announced that he was building an AC electrical system to compete with Edison's DC system, Edison did something that surprised people who expected a calm technical debate. He declared war. Not a polite scientific war of papers and arguments. A vicious, public, theatrical war designed to terrify ordinary people, people who didn't understand electricity and could therefore be frightened by it. Edison's campaign had a clear strategy, convinced the public that alternating current was deadly and DC was safe. And Edison was willing to go very far to make that point. He hired people to travel around the country, staging public demonstrations. They would gather a crowd, bring out a metal platform, and electrocute animals on it using AC current. Stray dogs and cats, obtained sometimes from school children who were paid 25 cents per animal. Calves, eventually a horse. The message was crude but effective. This is what alternating current does. Is this what you want in your home? Now, here is where we need to be careful about history, because the story gets more complicated than it first appears. One of Edison's associates, an electrical engineer named Harold Brown, took the campaign a step further. He proposed that alternating current should be used as the method of execution in New York's new electric chair, so that the phrase Westinghoused would become synonymous with death in the public mind. The first execution by electric chair took place at Auburn State Prison in 1890, and it was horrific, described by disgusted witnesses as brutal and inhuman. The strategy was, make AC current the instrument of death in the public imagination. And years later, in 1903, the Edison Manufacturing Company filmed the electrocution of a circus elephant named Topsy at Coney Island. Topsy had been condemned for killing 3 men, and her owners decided that electrocution was the most efficient method. 6,600 volts of alternating current killed her in about 10 seconds. The Edison Company filmed it. But by 1903, Edison himself had already largely left the electricity business. He had been pushed out of the company that bore his name years earlier. So this is not quite the story of Edison personally orchestrating the electrocution of an elephant. It is the story of a company using his name, continuing a smear campaign, in a war that was already effectively over. Because the war had a winner, and the winner was not Edison. The fundamental technical problem with direct current is straightforward. You can't change its voltage. Whatever voltage you generate is the voltage it stays. To deliver DC power over long distances without losing most of it to heat, you would need copper wires as thick as your arm and a new power station every mile. AC current, by contrast, can be stepped up to very high voltage using a transformer, like a pressure pump that squeezes electricity sent over long distances with minimal loss, and then stepped back down to safe household voltage at the other end. It was not even close to a fair fight, technically. The place where the war was decided, where Westinghouse and Tesla proved before the eyes of the world that alternating current was the future, was Chicago. In 1893, at the greatest celebration America had ever thrown. The World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 was supposed to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas. But it became something far larger than history. It became a vision of the future. 27 million people attended the Chicago World's Fair over its 6 months. They came from across America and from Europe and from around the world to see what the modern age looked like. And what the modern age looked like, it turned out, was electric light. The Edison Company, now restructured as General Electric, put in a bid to provide electricity for the fair. It was roughly $1 million. Westinghouse underbid them at $500,000 and won the contract. General Electric, furious, refused to sell Westinghouse any Edison-designed light bulbs and got a court ruling preventing him from using any single-piece lamps at the fair. Westinghouse's engineers worked frantically and designed an entirely new 2-piece lamp in time. They saved the day. On the evening of May 1st, 1893, 100,000 people packed the fairgrounds. President Grover Cleveland stood at a podium. He pressed a button. 100,000 lights exploded into brilliance simultaneously. Multicolored searchlights swept the sky. The neoclassical white buildings of the fair, already nicknamed the White City, blazed as if the sun had moved to earth. It was described by everyone who saw it as the most incredible display of lighting the human world had ever witnessed. And in the Great Hall of Electricity, Tesla himself performed demonstrations. He showed visitors the Egg of Columbus, a spinning copper egg that levitated and rotated on its pointed end inside a rotating magnetic field, demonstrating the very principle of the AC motor. He lit fluorescent tubes that glowed without any wires attached. He demonstrated wireless power passing through glass tubes filled with gas, making them glow like neon signs. And then, in his white tie and tails, standing on a specially insulated platform with his cork-soled shoes, he put his hand on a high-frequency electrical terminal. Electricity passed through his body. Flames, witnesses said, seemed to play around his fingers. His whole form was luminous, surrounded by an aura of pale fire. He stood in the electricity and smiled. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then they roared. Nikola Tesla had just demonstrated in front of 100,000 people that alternating current could be perfectly safe. He had stood in it. He was alive. He was glowing. The war of the currents was not over yet, but its outcome was no longer seriously in doubt. The greatest proof would come 2 years later, beside the greatest waterfall in the Western Hemisphere, a waterfall that Nikola Tesla had dreamed about since he was a child. Tesla's mother once told him about Niagara Falls. He was a small boy in Smiljan, maybe 5 or 6 years old, when he first saw a picture of it. The image stayed in his mind with the same absolute clarity that all important things stayed in his mind. The massive curtain of water, the roar that people said you could hear from miles away, the sheer, incomprehensible power of it, the volume of water, the force of its fall, the perpetual thunder of it, day after day, century after century, all of that energy spending itself in the river below and going nowhere. I told my uncle, Tesla later wrote, that one day I would go to America and carry out the scheme I had imagined, to harness this waterfall and run a large wheel with it. He was a child, but he meant it. The famous British physicist Lord Kelvin headed an international commission to determine the best way to harness Niagara Falls power. Initially, Kelvin had sent a telegram to the other members of the commission, warning them to avoid the gigantic mistake of alternating current. Then, Lord Kelvin attended the 1893 Chicago World's Fair and saw the AC system in operation. He changed his mind immediately. The contract was awarded to Westinghouse Electric to build a hydroelectric plant at Niagara Falls using Tesla's AC system. The engineering challenge was unlike anything that had ever been attempted. 3 enormous generators, each producing 5,000 horsepower, the largest ever built, were designed based on Tesla's specifications. Heated arguments broke out between Tesla and Westinghouse engineers about the exact operating frequency. Even when the system was finally ready, Tesla was the only person in the room who was completely certain it would work. In 1896, the switch was thrown. The waters of the upper Niagara turned massive turbines connected to the 5,000 horsepower generators. The current was stepped up with transformers to 22,000 volts, sent out over long-distance transmission lines to Buffalo, 20 miles away, and then stepped back down to safe household and industrial levels. The Niagara Falls Gazette wrote the next morning, "This morning the streetcars of this city are moving by Falls power. Hereafter the Falls must work to earn their living." Tesla stood by that plant and thought about the small boy in Smiljan who had looked at a picture of this waterfall and made a promise to himself. "Imagine my surprise," he wrote later, "when 30 years after I saw my boyhood plan carried out at Niagara and wondered at the unfathomable mystery of the mind." The War of the Currents was over. Within 10 years, the power lines from Niagara stretched 360 miles to New York City. Within a generation, alternating current was the global standard for electricity, the system still used in every home, every building, every socket on Earth today. Edison's DC system was phased out. Edison himself, in a later and extraordinary irony, was gradually pushed out of his own company and left the electricity business entirely. Ted won. But winning, it turned out, was not the same thing as being celebrated for winning. In the years following Niagara, Nikola Tesla was one of the most famous men in the world. He lived in New York, at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, one of the grandest addresses in the city. Every evening he went to Delmonico's, the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan, where a special table was always held for him. He arrived immaculate, perfectly tailored suit, white waistcoat, white leather gloves, derby hat at precisely the right angle. He was tall and thin with high Slavic cheekbones and eyes, as one journalist wrote, that burned like balls of fire. He cut an extraordinary figure, the kind of person who makes every room feel like it reorganized itself around him. His friends were the elite of New York: John Jacob Astor, one of the wealthiest men in America; William K. Vanderbilt, the famous French actress Sarah Bernhardt; Katherine Johnson, wife of the editor of the Century magazine, who was, it must be said, deeply in love with Tesla. To leave aside the millionaires of Fifth Avenue for some simple pleasures, she wrote to him. He was gracious and fond of her, and almost certainly oblivious. And Mark Twain. Mark Twain, the great American writer, the man who wrote Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, was one of Tesla's closest friends. They spent evenings together in Tesla's laboratory, where Twain was always an enthusiastic subject for electrical demonstrations. Twain later wrote of Tesla's inventions, "I have seen the drawings and description of an electrical machine recently patented by Mr. R. Tesla, which will revolutionize the whole electric business of the world." There is a beautiful story Tesla told about Twain that says something important about both men. When Tesla was sick and bedridden as a young teenager, not the cholera, an earlier illness, it was the stories of Mark Twain that gave him the strength to keep going. He read everything Twain had written. He told Twain this years later when they were friends and standing in Tesla's New York laboratory. Twain burst into tears. But Tesla, brilliant, celebrated at the very height of his fame, was also profoundly, genuinely, structurally alone. He never married. He insisted he had deliberately chosen this, that at around age 40 he had made the decision to extinguish his romantic feelings entirely, to concentrate his entire self on invention. He spoke of this with a kind of proud abstinence, as if he had won a difficult battle against distraction. "A certain French actress kept coming to me," he said once. "She made it impossible for me to concentrate. It is a pity, too, for sometimes I feel so lonely. Sometimes I feel so lonely." 5 words, dropped almost casually, that tell you everything about the distance between the public Tesla, magnetic, famous, adored, and the private one. He couldn't easily shake hands, because of his aversion to germs. He couldn't tolerate women who wore pearls or earrings, because of the old phobias from childhood. He couldn't stand the smell of certain perfumes. Intimacy required the kind of closeness that his particular mind and body found genuinely painful to maintain. He was celebrated by everyone and deeply close to almost no one. And in his laboratory on South Fifth Avenue, he was pursuing something that no one else could see yet. A way to transmit not just signals, but actual electrical power through the air, without any wires at all. The invention that would either make him the most important person in history or destroy him. First, though, he had more wonders to show the world. The Tesla coil. If you have ever seen a tall metal cylinder with sparks leaping off it in a dome of electrical light, that is a Tesla coil. You can find them in science museums. They are dramatic and beautiful and slightly frightening. Children love them. Tesla invented them in the 1890s as a device for generating very high voltages at very high frequencies, essential tools for exploring the world of electromagnetic waves and wireless energy. He held late-night demonstrations in his laboratory that became the most extraordinary events in New York's social calendar. He would invite friends and potential investors, including Mark Twain, who was a regular, and show them things that looked less like science and more like magic. He would hand guests a coil of wire tuned to resonate with his apparatus, and they would walk around the room, no connections, no wires between them and the machine, and lamps would light in their hands. He would shoot flames from his fingertips. He would run current through his own body, producing an aura of pale blue light. Even today, a historian has noted, it would be a little bit scary to go into Tesla's laboratory. In those days, when people knew almost nothing about electricity, it must have been terrifying. Tesla was also, in this period, doing serious scientific work that the world wasn't ready to appreciate. He became one of the first people to experiment with X-rays, a few years before Wilhelm Röntgen officially discovered them, and he was also one of the first to warn about their dangers to human tissue, years before anyone else was paying attention to the risk. He worked on early neon and fluorescent lighting. He studied what happened when you passed high-frequency current through tubes filled with different gases and found that they glowed in different colors. And then, in 1898, he unveiled something that silenced a room at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Tesla had built a radio-controlled boat, 4 feet long, a small motorized vessel. He put it in a specially constructed pool in the garden and demonstrated it to an audience of potential investors and curious citizens. The boat moved, turned, stopped, reversed direction, sped up, slowed down. There were no wires, no operator on the boat, nothing visible between Tesla at his control console and the vessel in the water. The audience was baffled. They began calling out suggestions for what the explanation might be. Some thought there was a trained monkey hidden inside the hull. Some thought Tesla was using telepathy, controlling the boat with his mind. Some believed it was magic or spirits. Someone called out, "What is the cube root of 64?" The boat flashed its signal light 4 times. Tesla had to remove the lid of the boat and show the audience the radio receiver inside to prove there was no monkey. This was 1898. The radio was not a household object yet. Wireless remote control was not a thing anyone had seen before. The concept of a machine that could receive commands through the air and act on them, the foundational concept behind every remote control, every drone, every wireless device that exists today, Tesla demonstrated it in a swimming pool in Madison Square Garden to an audience who thought he was doing magic. The remote-controlled boat Tesla demonstrated in 1898 is considered the world's first radio-controlled device. He filed a patent for it and believed it could be developed into an autonomous weapons system that would make war obsolete, ships that could fight without putting sailors in danger. The U.S. military, who he offered it to, said it was too complicated and too vulnerable. The drone age would have to wait a century. Tesla's mind was racing, always, toward the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, the biggest thing, the thing that kept him awake in his laboratory, the thing that he dreamed about, was wireless power. Not signals, not radio, power. Actual electrical energy, transmitted through the air or through the earth itself, reaching every person on the planet. For free. March 13, 1895, the Ides of March. In the early morning hours, fire broke out in the building on South Fifth Avenue in New York that housed Tesla's laboratory. It started in the lower floors, a fire in another tenant's space, but it consumed everything. By the time anyone could stop it, Tesla's laboratory on the upper floors was gone. Not just damage gone. Years of work, unpatented inventions, prototypes that existed nowhere else. Research that he had not written down, had not filed, had not formally documented, because he had been so certain that everything he needed was safe in his own mind. Models of devices he had never shared with anyone. Experiments in progress. All of it in 1 hour. Tesla was not in the building when it happened. He was at his hotel. Someone came to tell him. He went to the scene. He stood in the street and looked at what was left. The newspapers reported it with appropriate shock. Utterly disheartened and broken in spirit, Nikola Tesla, one of the world's greatest electricians, returned to his room and took to his bed. He has not arisen since. "I was devastated," Tesla wrote later. "What could I say? The work of a lifetime, lost in a fire that lasted only an hour or so." He recovered. He always recovered. He built a new laboratory and began the long, painstaking work of reconstructing years of research. He was resilient in ways that his story sometimes obscures. Every time the world knocked him down, he found a way to get up again. But the timing of this fire was devastating in a way that went beyond the immediate loss. Because at exactly this moment, in England, a young Italian experimenter named Guglielmo Marconi had been working steadily and methodically on wireless telegraphy. He had been studying Tesla's published work. He had access to Tesla's ideas and had built on them. And now, with Tesla momentarily stopped, his laboratory destroyed, his work in ruins, Marconi was accelerating. By the time Tesla had rebuilt enough to file his key radio patents in September 1897, Marconi was already establishing himself in Britain. When Marconi tried to file for U.S. patents, they were initially rejected because his ideas were deemed too similar to Tesla's. But Marconi was persistent, well-funded, well-connected, and, crucially, better at the game of publicity and business than Tesla had ever been or ever would be. The race for radio was on, and Tesla was about to take a detour to the middle of Colorado to conduct the most spectacular secret experiments in the history of science. Colorado Springs, Colorado, summer 1899. Imagine you are standing outside a wooden building on the outskirts of Colorado Springs, Colorado. It is night. The Rocky Mountains are a darker darkness against the dark sky to the west. The air smells of pine and dust and something else, something sharp and electric, like the air before a storm, but without any clouds. You are here because you were told something extraordinary was going to happen tonight. You are not given details, just be here, watch. Inside that wooden building, which has a sliding roof that can open to the sky, and an antenna mast that rises 145 feet above the structure, topped with a copper sphere, Nikola Tesla is giving an instruction to his assistant. Close the switch. The switch closes, and the world changes. Streamers of electricity, thick as your arm and white as magnesium fire, erupt from the central coil inside the building and shoot across the room in every direction. The noise is not a hiss or a crackle, it is a detonation. A continuous detonation, like artillery firing without stopping. You feel it in your chest. And then, above the building, from the copper sphere at the top of the antenna, lightning. Not the thin branching flickers of natural lightning, not the kind you watch from a porch during a summer storm. Man-made lightning bolts, more than 100 feet long, bright as magnesium, tearing the black sky apart above the building with a sound that shakes the ground. 20 miles away, in the small mining town of Cripple Creek, people stopped what they were doing and looked toward the horizon. The sky was on fire. Nobody could explain it. And then, suddenly, the lightning stopped. The city of Colorado Springs went dark. All of it, simultaneously, every light, every electric device in the entire city. Because the force that Tesla's transmitter had called down from the sky had overloaded, caught fire, and destroyed the local power company's generator. The residents of Colorado Springs were not amused. They were, in fact, furious. This mysterious Eastern scientist, with his bizarre wooden tower, had knocked out the power for the entire city. Tesla, undaunted, helped pay for repairs to the generator and continued his experiments for 6 more months. He was testing something that had never been tested before. Whether it was possible to transmit actual electrical power through the upper atmosphere, not just signals, not just messages, but raw, usable energy that could light a lamp or run a motor at the receiving end. He built the largest Tesla coil ever constructed, his magnifying transmitter, and tested theories of resonance, studying the Earth itself as if it were a giant electrical circuit. He became convinced he was right. And then, late one night, something happened that he was not expecting. His receiving apparatus picked up a signal, a repeating signal, rhythmic, regular, not random noise, not the kind of interference the Earth's atmosphere generates. 1, 2, 3. Tesla stared at his instruments. He checked and rechecked. He eliminated every possible mundane explanation he could think of. And then, with both the seriousness of a scientist and the wonder of a man who had grown up watching sparks fly from his cat in a dark farmhouse, he wrote in his notebook that he believed he might have received a communication from another world. He later wrote to the American Red Cross, "Brothers, we have a message from another world. It reads 123. The newspapers had what you might imagine the newspapers had. Colorado Springs reporters suggested that, if the signal really was from Mars, the Martians had shown excellent taste in choosing Colorado Springs as the reception point. The truth, we now know, is that Tesla was almost certainly detecting naturally occurring radio waves from the Earth's atmosphere, from the sun, from the stars. Radio telescopes do the same thing today. He was not hearing Mars, but he may have been the first human being to deliberately set up equipment sensitive enough to receive signals from space, even if he couldn't yet know what those signals were. Tesla returned to New York in January 1900 with notebooks full of equations and a certainty burning in his chest like a furnace. He knew what he was going to build next. He just needed to find someone willing to fund a dream. The most powerful banker in the United States in 1900 was J. Pierpont Morgan. J.P. Morgan was not a man who invested in things he didn't understand. He was a man who built empires, financial empires, industrial empires, the kind that reorganized entire economies. He had helped finance Edison's original DC electrical system. He was one of the most powerful individuals in the world. Tesla went to him. Tesla told Morgan he wanted to build a worldwide wireless communication system, a tower on Long Island that could broadcast signals across the Atlantic and eventually around the globe. This was the age of wireless excitement. Marconi was building his system. Newspapers were full of articles about the coming era of wireless telegraphy, and Morgan could see the business value of a global communications network. Morgan agreed to invest $150,000. What Tesla did not tell Morgan, what Tesla deliberately chose to keep secret, was that wireless communication was only a fraction of what he actually intended. The real plan was bigger, much bigger. Tesla intended to use the tower, to use the Earth itself as a conductor, to transmit electrical power wirelessly to every corner of the globe. Free electricity, not a signal, not a message. Power, the kind of power that runs a factory, lights a city, heats a home, broadcast from a single transmitter, received by anyone with a simple receiver anywhere on Earth. For free. No wires, no cables, no electric bills. He wrote about what this system would make possible, and his words have the quality of a man who is not describing the future so much as seeing it. A telephone subscriber here may call up and talk to any other subscriber on the globe. An inexpensive receiver, not bigger than a watch, will enable him to listen anywhere on land or sea to a speech delivered or music played in some other place, however distant. In the same manner, any picture, character, drawing, or print can be transferred from one place to another. Millions of such instruments can be operated from but one plant of this kind. Read that description. A device not bigger than a watch that can receive voice, music, images from anywhere in the world. He was describing a smartphone. In 1900, construction on what Tesla called Wardenclyffe began in the summer of 1900 on Long Island in a community called Shoreham. The tower rose 187 feet above the ground. Its base was a network of iron piping driven deep into the earth. The ground connection that Tesla believed would make the whole system work. The building at the tower's base was designed by the famous architect Stanford White and built under strict secrecy. The tower was the most ambitious engineering project Tesla had ever attempted, and it was about to run directly into the worst news he had ever received. December 12, 1901. Guglielmo Marconi climbed a hill in Newfoundland, Canada, and raised an antenna on a kite. In Cornwall, England, his colleagues transmitted a signal. In Newfoundland, Marconi's receiver picked it up. The letter S in Morse code, 3 short dots, transmitted across 3,000 miles of open Atlantic Ocean. The world's first transatlantic radio communication. The newspapers went wild. Marconi was front page everywhere. He was the genius who had conquered the Atlantic with invisible waves. He was the future. He was the story. Tesla's name was barely mentioned. Tesla was publicly dismissive. Marconi is a good fellow, he said with studied nonchalance. Let him continue. He is using 17 of my patents. He meant it literally. He believed, correctly, that Marconi's system was built on foundations Tesla had laid, on patents Tesla had filed. But in the court of public opinion, Marconi had won. He was the name everyone knew. And Morgan was watching the newspapers. Morgan began to have doubts. Marconi's system worked. It was cheaper and simpler than Tesla's vision. And Tesla, when pressed, had to admit that the transatlantic wireless radio was not in fact what Wardenclyffe was really for. He told Morgan the truth. "What I contemplate, and what I can certainly accomplish, Mr. Morgan," he wrote, "is not a simple transmission of messages, but the worldwide transmission of electrical power." Morgan read this letter, and then Morgan wrote back, "I have received your letter, and in reply would say that I should not feel disposed at present to make any further advances." That was it. Morgan was out. The money was gone. And without Morgan's backing, Tesla's frantic letters to other potential investors went nowhere, because word had spread that Morgan had pulled out, and when J.P. Morgan doesn't believe in a project, no one else in New York is going to touch it. There was another problem too, and it is important to be honest about this. Tesla believed absolutely that he could transmit electrical power wirelessly to the world, but the physics were harder than he knew. You can transmit power wirelessly, we do it today, but the power dissipates across distance, spreading out through space rather than concentrating at a receiver. To transmit enough power to light a city from a single tower, you would need a system whose losses would be enormous. Tesla was not wrong about the concept. He was wrong, perhaps, about the scale. He tried to save Wardenclyffe for years. He borrowed money. He made promises. He worked on the tower past the point where working on it made financial sense, because he could not bring himself to give up on it. In 1915, the debt became too great. Wardenclyffe went into foreclosure. 2 years later, in 1917, a new owner demolished the tower and sold it for scrap metal. Tesla did not go to watch. Wardenclyffe was gone, and with it, the greatest dream of Tesla's life. After Wardenclyffe, something in Tesla broke. Not his mind, not his intelligence. Those would remain extraordinary to the very end. But something in the structure of his life gave way, and what followed was long and painful and quiet in a way that public failure rarely is. He had debts he could not pay, hotels he had to leave, laboratories he had to close. He drifted from address to address, always behind on rent, always explaining to creditors that the next invention would take care of everything. In 1915, a front-page story in the New York Times announced that the Nobel Prize in Physics was to be awarded jointly to Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Tesla reportedly said he believed the honor had something to do with his wireless power research. The world held its breath. A week later, the prize was awarded to someone else entirely, William Bragg, for his work on X-rays. The announcement about Tesla and Edison was never explained. A rumor spread that Tesla had refused to share the prize with Edison. Another rumor said Edison had refused. The truth was never established, and neither man ever received the Nobel Prize. The difference it would have made to Tesla's life, the prize money, the renewed public recognition, the validation, would have been enormous. In 1916, the American Institute of Electrical Engineers decided to award Tesla their highest honor, the Edison Medal, named, with painful irony, for the man who had told Tesla that he simply didn't understand American humor. On the night of the presentation dinner, the guest of honor was missing. His friends found him across the street from the venue, beside the New York Public Library, feeding pigeons. They persuaded him to come inside and accept his medal. He did, and he gave a brief speech in which he announced he had finally completed his calculations for wireless power transmission. The audience, sadly, thought he was losing his grip on reality. Tesla did not have a grip on reality that most people would recognize as normal. He was brilliant and eccentric and increasingly isolated and increasingly obsessed with things he couldn't prove to anyone else's satisfaction. He attacked Einstein's theory of relativity, the consensus of the entire physics world, and no one took him seriously when he did. He claimed he had invented a death ray, a particle beam weapon that could shoot airplanes from the sky and destroy armies, and tried to sell it to multiple governments, including England, the Soviet Union, and his homeland of Yugoslavia. None of them bought it, though the British briefly investigated the concept before abandoning it. But there is a thread in those later years that has nothing dramatic about it, nothing that makes the newspapers, nothing that sounds like the biography of a genius. Every day Nikola Tesla fed the pigeons. In Bryant Park, in Madison Square, outside the New York Public Library. He would go every single day, in all weather, and scatter grain and crumbs for the city's pigeons. He knew many of them individually, their markings, their habits, their personalities. And there was one white pigeon with gentle eyes and an injured leg, who would fly to his window at the hotel when he called her. Tesla spoke about this pigeon in words that are frankly heartbreaking. "I have been feeding pigeons for years, thousands of them," he said near the end of his life. "But there was one, a beautiful bird, pure white with light gray tips on its wings. That one I could pick out from all the others. Wherever I was, that pigeon would find me. When she was ill, I knew it and understood. She understood me. I loved that pigeon. And then lower, I loved her as a man loves a woman, and she loved me." The Portuguese documentary about Tesla's life adds a detail that almost no other account includes, that one day Tesla found this pigeon injured, her wing and leg broken, unable to stand. He built her a small brace with his own hands, a tiny splint of wire, to hold her upright while she healed. He brought her to his hotel room. He spent $2,000 he didn't have on her care. $2,000, he who couldn't pay his rent, for a pigeon, because she was the thing in his life near the end that he loved without reservation and that loved him back without complication. One night, Tesla was lying in his hotel room and the pigeon flew to his window. He knew, the way he sometimes knew things, that she was dying. He took her in his hands, he held her, and she died there. Tesla later said that when she died, something died in him too, that he knew in that moment his life's work was truly finished. He was probably right, but the world was not quite done with him yet. July 10, 1931, Nikola Tesla's 75th birthday. Time magazine put him on the cover. The photograph shows an old man, lean, formal, those extraordinary eyes still vivid even in the black and white image. Inside, the magazine celebrated him as one of the great scientists of the age. And from around the world, letters and telegrams poured in. From scientists, from engineers, from former colleagues, from admirers he had never met, from people whose grandparents had seen him light up the Chicago World's Fair, from people who used the electrical system he had designed every single day of their lives. And from Albert Einstein, the physicist Tesla had been publicly dismissing for years, the man whose relativity theory Tesla insisted was wrong. A generous letter that set aside all of that and simply said, "I congratulate you for your great success in your lifetime's task." Tesla, who had spent years insisting Einstein was taking science in the wrong direction, who had attacked relativity in public statements that the physics community found embarrassing, received this letter from the most famous scientist in the world and was, by all accounts, deeply moved. At a press conference to celebrate the birthday, Tesla announced that he had discovered a completely new source of power. He spoke in the florid, dramatic language that had become his trademark in his later years. Nobody quite knew what to make of it. He was old and somewhat reclusive, and had been making extraordinary claims for years that turned out to be unprovable. But he was also still Nikola Tesla, the man who had been right about AC current when everyone laughed at him, the man who had been right about radio when the patents were given to someone else, the man who had been right about the Niagara Falls plan when Lord Kelvin himself had called it a mistake. Maybe, people thought, maybe. The birthday celebration faded. The attention moved on, as attention always does. Tesla went back to his room. It was, by this point, a single room in the Hotel New Yorker,